Hey, everybody. So, welcome into something new, something that we've never done before. So, wanted to introduce you to somebody first of all. You're going to meet one of my best friends in the entire planet, one of the best jazz musicians and teachers I know, Chris Claxton, in this video. And you may have actually seen him. I posted a duo video of him and I playing Ladybird together. Chris is an excellent pianist. He's also a world class trumpet player. And he is a teacher in my jazz intensive online mentorship program. So, Chris, along with myself, we get together with all the students, we do coaching calls, we have assignments, we do all kinds of great stuff. And I wanted to introduce him to you. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of him on the channel because we're working so closely together these days. And one of the things that Chris and I love to do is sit around and talk about music or talk about how we teach and feed into each other's energies and each other's ideas about teaching. So, one thing we decided a couple weeks ago was, well, why not record these conversations? Because a lot of times when we're having them, there's a lot of really, really great stuff in there. And when we get done with the conversation, we're thinking to ourselves, we should have recorded that. I think students could have gotten a lot out of that conversation. So we're going to try to do a lot more of these types of conversations, and hopefully all of you will get something out of listening to them. Now, I mentioned the Jazz Intensive. That's where I have a very select group of students that Chris and I work with extremely closely, trying to deliver the absolute best day-to-day jazz education that we can provide. If you're looking for mentorship, if you're looking for a program like this where you can be with a lot of like-minded individuals and receive individualized attention, have somebody kind of knowing where you're at and providing you with a path forward, as well as giving you feedback, answering your questions, there's going to be a link below this video. Now, depending on when you're watching this, enrollment may be closed. We don't accept a ton of students. So you'll either be able to get in, see what it's all about, and decide if it's something that you might want to do, or there might be something that is a waiting list. But if you think this might be something that you're interested in, just put your name on that waiting list. And then as spots open up, what I do is I go right down that list in order of people who signed up for it. And at that point, we can talk a little bit further about the Jazz Intensive and whether it's right for you. Okay, so without further ado, enjoy Chris and I's conversation about circles, squares, and triangles. Everybody just act natural. So, Chris, I think we should talk about something that we've been getting a lot of questions about, like in the Jazz Intensive lately, about why we should work on structures not like directly applied to playing tunes, man. Is there any benefit to that, or like what? Yeah. Do you do it?
Are you talking about questions that are raised that blow our brains wide open, or that are asked in the same way so often they chap our ass a bit, and we want to find a really good way to satiate the herd and put the issue to bed in a way?
Yeah. Wow. I never really thought about it that way. But yeah, I guess if we could put the issue to bed, then we wouldn't have to worry about it and they wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I was slow in my becoming to practice like anything methodically because I thought it would rob me of my individual artistry and freedoms.
Don't want that.
And I know, looking back, that I didn't feel great or super good or smart. I really thought it was I think now it was a miscommunication between me and the user agreement I click on between me and jazz.
Okay.
So I just thought that I had to be the composer of every note. Like I thought I had to make that level of decision all the time. And I just didn't really understand that, like, scales in and of themselves are orderly and beautiful. I just started noticing as I got older some favorite moments of mine in like a Dave Douglas solo would be like he just continues ascending or descending.
Yeah.
And I was like smart enough to be like, that's just a major scale. He keeps playing.
I just heard that in
note.
a Ben Wendell solo the other day. He just played down a major scale and it was like,
wow, that's beautiful. So I think I trace it back to like an actual Dave Douglas solo,
Yeah,
where I was
yeah.
like, whoa, the scale in itself without any editing or like Dave Douglas's personality all over it. Clearly his personality is all over the way it's coming out.
Of course.
But I was like, whoa, like the musical item itself does so much heavy lifting.
Mm.
And then after that moment, it's not like I just magically ran with that concept and changed my life immediately because I'm a
Right.
broken man.
Hear you.
But I remember I was in grad school at the age of like 26 or 27, and I heard like a 19-year-old saxophone player in a practice room just sounding so beautiful.
Oh, the dreaded 19-year-old when you're older than 19.
And I knocked on the door. It was like, that is so cool. What are you doing? And he was like, major scales, man. And I was like, no, you're not. So he was like, well, look at the piano. Like, are you, you know that inside a C major scale, there's like C major, D minor, E minor, F major. He just played the triads. And I was like, well, yeah, I am a fairly sophisticated adult. I do know that. And he was like, so you practice that stuff? And I was like, okay. So like a 19-year-old also like, we have to receive this lesson over and over. He was like, do you know that this exists? And I was like, of course. What do you take me for?
Mm-hmm.
And then his next question was, do you practice it?
Right.
And I was like, oh, lesson learned. But I still asked questions. I was like, well, I'm a trumpet player. So
Right.
like some troglodyte trumpet player like all of us. Like we play notes that are very close together because they're easier to achieve than wide intervals.
It's the same thing on saxophone.
Yeah?
Yeah, yeah. Notes that are closer together are much easier to play.
I'll stop hating on you guys then.
Thanks, man.
I got my barrel of my gun pointed at guitarists and pianists now. Screw those guys. So I was just like, well, can you just improvise for me for a second and play what you played? And there are all these beautifully wide intervals, and really it didn't sound like the major scale. It sounded like
Right.
super disguised. It was just beautiful, like very open interval music that I'm jealous of being a trumpet player. And he was like, oh, well, I've done a lot of practice with root position triads going up and down the major scale, but I flip them in inversions too, so that leaves a wider interval on one side of the chord.
Right.
And I was like, wow, it's so beautiful. So I just went and shedded this stuff on the trumpet for a couple weeks, and right away I was like, wow, it's really hard. Like my face doesn't know where these intervals are because I haven't really been through this before. My ear accepts it because it has there's a flavor to it that I've heard a million times. But my ear is also fuzzy enough on it where it's like, I know right now that I've never played a single melody of this contour ever in my improvisation. And it's like I learned to speak English while leaving out half of the important words that we use every day.
So something that you initially, when he was like, do you know that there's triads in a major scale? You were like,
Of course.
dude,
What are you
of
doing?
course
I'm
I
not a
do.
simpleton. I'm here at a fantastic university.
But then
with
you had the experience of playing those things that you knew about, and you'd never played it that way before.
Yeah, like the thing that I knew and would have aced on the paper test, or
Right.
I've like taught to other students.
Right.
Or I could do on a piano like this. I tried to do on the trumpet, and I was like, this is entirely new information. I've never thought like this. I've never done this in my body before. So it felt super new and foreign, but very consonant at the same time and pleasing. So that made it like this perfect thing for me to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I could sit at the piano and do most of the heavy lifting of like order of events and neighborly relationships. I could hear it. I could see it.
Yeah.
I could ground it in a drone of C if I was working on the C scale,
Yeah.
or a drone of any other key and work on the C scale. So it just was immediately helpful. It made me feel stronger physically, a little quicker mentally. And within like a month, my friends in school were like, whoa, what happened to you? What have you been transcribing? And I was like, actually, I just talked to that child over there.
Yeah.
And I've been practicing my major scales differently. And
Yeah.
they
Wow.
weren't, like even all these super hip kids who I think it's true to say they were much better than me at that time, weren't exactly decoding what I was doing still. So like the actual ingredients were somewhat veiled. just because like
Interesting.
they have there's no option but for those ingredients to come out
Right.
my body with its strengths and impediments. So like
Yeah.
that kind of like gives it some personality and tone and my rhythms. So like they didn't know it was just major scale stuff.
So what I'm hearing is, and I think this is definitely important to me, is that it's not the, is it fair to say that you could go the rest of your life just trying to, I forget the word you used, but it was a really, really good one. I'm going to use a poor substitute for it. Rearrange the basics. Like, take the basic material and flip it another way, flip it another way, flip it another way. And the thing that always gets me about it is when I start doing that, you realize pretty quickly that you will never not be able to do it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's always another way to do it. Is that sort of what you're getting at when you're talking about this kind of stuff? Is that something that you've realized in your life as a musician? Because I know it has with mine, and I feel like the more advanced I get, the simpler the stuff I'm working on is.
Yeah. I honestly forget who said this, but I just like saw some interview with like one of my hero musicians, and they were asked what they practice, and they answered in like 10 seconds. They're like, I do major scales, I do that in triads, I do melodic minor, that in triads, I do diminished scales, that in triads, maybe harmonic minor and triad. Right. And that's, I think, all you need to know about Western music. And I was like, I felt really empowered by that, because I was like, that's kind of where my time that I have to practice. And like, now that I'm a working person and a father, it's like my exploration with new material has diminished.
Right.
But I still dig into these, like literally what he mentioned. I was like, oh, that's all I have time for, and that's all my brain really knows about. But I felt like really empowered, because this is one of my heroes saying this.
Of course.
Who speaks in colors and shapes and rhythms that like most of us won't get to before we die. So I was like, wow, look at how they're like I don't want to use the term thought leader, but like, look how they're like a leader of design and hipness in this field. And they just pretty much like reduce their toolkit to the scales we learned when we were in like third grade.
Yeah, that's great. And that's something, when we were in college together, one thing that I always used to do is whenever a guest artist came in, they would inevitably ask for a place that they could warm up, practice, like whatever, right?
And you're like,
yeah. And that's literally what I did. Like I would figure out where they went, and I would sit outside the room and I would just listen. And I always expected it to be like some brilliant, earth-shattering, like, oh, they're practicing that. I would have never thought about that.
like,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, it's like the best musicians in the world. And when they get in a room by themselves and they think nobody's listening, but there's some douchebag sitting outside of their room, that's what they do. But it's a complete and total freedom with that stuff that inspires the crap out of us.
Mm-hmm. It just made me remember James Moody practicing major scales at like quarter note equals 10.
Right, exactly.
He's like, man, you can't play fast. If you practice fast, you got to practice slow, man.
Yeah, so true.
When I went to Moody's house once for a little dinner, he had 4 music stands open and next to each other, so he could bridge all the music he's playing in one horizontal line.
Yeah.
And they were like Jerry Coker's like Welcome to Jazz books.
Man.
Right?
Yep.
Like the beginning fundamentals books he was practicing. Classical flute etudes. And like that's it.
And so that might be like a good thing to sort of end this little discussion on, is I think a lot of people too, they have this idea that somebody like James Moody, legend, can't think of many people that I'd like to listen to more than James Moody, it has to be like, it's just me and my instrument and the universe in a room. But Moody, like when I was hanging out with him in college, he had like 10 books in his bag. And he like took them all out and showed me something from each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many ways to do this thing.
That's because he had like a healthy relationship with resources.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
little jazz peons like us, we can get overwhelmed because like we always imagine, like it fuels into like, it ties into like our hero worship, because we're like, well, they create every note. They're the author of every note in real time. They're the divinely inspired composer. They wouldn't just use the triads that are a part and parcel of the C major scale because they are so hip and cool.
Right.
So like I think in the way that we worship heroes and like almost ascribe too much to them, when I personally like started to evolve that kind of hero worship, I still have these heroes, but like I worship them for a different set of criteria and like being resourceful with simple tools and repeating themselves frequently so they develop a comfortable language and a brand. Yeah. Rather than I used to think my heroes were like just divinely inspired authors upholding the unbearable weight of composition every note they play. And we do the same thing with books. We're like, well, this book is smarter than me, so I got to do the whole thing. Right. And we ignore our personal deficits and attention spans. And so Moody picks one page out of this book and another page out of that book. That's like such a nice way to accept and reject at the same time.
And that was exactly it. Like he wasn't playing everything out of all 10 of those books. That's insane.
Like, you know that guy was not addicted to 10 method books cover to cover at the age of 86 or whatever. Like, he was like, and again, like maybe accruing time helps you cherry pick better.
Yeah, so maybe something we could talk about like next time we sit and chat is like what you said about Dave Douglas, and what I said about Ben Wendell, where you hear just the descending or ascending major scale, but why is Dave Douglas and Ben Wendell like why don't we sound like that yet? You know, or why did it hit us so hard when it was just a very easily, like the Ben Wendell thing, man, like he literally played down a major scale in eighth notes. Like it wasn't, you know, but it was wrapped in his sound and his time and his...
I bet it came from someplace cool. There was some idea before it that warranted it, and there was some cool off-ramp he took off that highway.
You know what's weird about it? Well, obviously it was in the context of a larger solo. There was like a big open space before and a big open space after.
Oh, no. Maybe like, those were the two cool things that warranted it.
Exactly. So we should talk a little bit more about that, because it's like, okay, today we've talked about why it's valid and cool and a really good use of your time to work on like the DNA of music and like getting really good at that and getting as fluent with that stuff as possible, as free with that stuff as possible. We should talk about some of the other stuff, like the delivery of the information.
Yeah, exactly. And that's your personal brand, right?
Right.
That's sometimes the only thing I think I have going for me is like, I feel real dumb, real slow, real inarticulate sometimes, like everybody does, you know, bad at the horn, slow to think cool things. But like you always have your personal way of delivery, and no one can like really, barring any blunt head trauma, no one can take that away from you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, this reminds me of like, maybe it's like this final thought I have on using like simple, like on using just the elements of music, like in terms of Western music and like the notes, the 12 notes. Like when I was young, I thought it was more like I know about 12 notes and this array of scales and stuff, and it's all in a bingo ball machine, and I'll pull them out in a way that makes me really hip. But when you reach into the bingo ball machine, you can pull out like half sentences. You can pull out and like things that in and of themselves are already beautiful, like a chord upside down and an inversion is like so great.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of vocabulary words, like when we think, no one uses that word. I never heard of that word. I've never needed to use that word. You're telling me like this is on the assignment, this is on the test this week?
Yeah.
And you like kind of belittle this new word, like because you didn't know about it, and then you learn the new word, and it's in the book you're reading later that night in the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's in a magazine. It's in 2 Instagram posts. It's on a road sign. Oh, turns out everyone knew this word but me. So that's how I felt when I learned about diatonic major scale triads. Like, oh, this is the shapeliness of Western music I like. I just was the only one who didn't know that. And the other analogy I like a lot is like visual artists, like painters. Like I teach in an arts building, and half of it's music, and we went to school there, you know.
Yeah.
And the other half is art. So I walk in through the art side all the time, and I've been doing it so many semesters. I know when it's like freshman charcoal,
Right.
and when it's like upperclassmen full oil paintings. And in like semester 1, you see everyone just like their job is to make a good triangle, square, and circle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they shade those things and make them 3-dimensional. And then they make a bowl of fruit out of just those shapes.
Right.
And then they further shade and contour and smudge that until it looks like real fruit. And then they use triangles, circles, and squares to make a human face. And then they mold those things to be a real human face. And then there's all the abstract ways we saw artists do, like Kandinsky and Picasso, of like leaving it weird and leaving the triangle obvious. But like, I'm pretty sure human beings liked that. So you can paint a very true to life, like Italian villa, and start with circles, triangles, and rectangles.
I love it.
Or you can keep it shapely and weird for the shape's sake, and people have that all over their living room walls nowadays too.
Man, I love this.
So like, it'd be good if as musicians we kind of like at least understood the merit of circles, rectangles, and triangles, and tried to practice those like art kids do to make sure you can make a banger, and then a 3D banger, and then one that's a little closer to the language you speak and want, you know.
Beautiful. I'm going to hop on the visual art train as my final thought. My wife is like a ridiculous painter.
Deeply skilled painter, yeah.
And it always kills me because in her, where she keeps all her supplies to create these ridiculous oil paintings, there's only a couple colors of paint. Primary colors, man. And then she, as the artist, has the skill to make hundreds of shades.
Bend them into things people like.
It's amazing. And every time I see it, it's like, wait, I look at your supplies all the time. Like, what? Where's that color of paint? You know? I think that can definitely be true too, where if you know some primary colors on your instrument, you can continuously blend them together and try to create that freedom that my wife has with all the different shades she can make. She does it fast too, man.
She's practiced.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when my students tend to resent or like, it's very easy to forgive all of it because they're students despite their age and experience. But I guess I start to push back when students push back on me, or they say like the sound of this as I practice it is very vanilla. Like I want to be Freddie Hubbard when I grow up. Why would I say ba 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 ba? And like I think I told some college student last week, it was like that'd be like Frank Lloyd Wright saying that, like, do you think he thought that triangles, circles, and squares were like not hip? Like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Like they're essential to make a building livable.
Right.
And they're also the only tools at your disposal to make it cool.
Damn.
Right? So like as musicians, we need to be listenable. Like it just needs to be recognizably human music enough so that more than just your ears are like, that's nice. Right. And then it's perhaps incumbent upon you to use the same things to make them personal and cool or hip or stylized.
Yeah.
Everyone in every discipline ever has just worked with like several fundamentals, and a sculptor literally bends them to their will. So like that's why all our heroes can sound good. They're like, they know when to resign their ego and play simple things, practice simple things. So they're like really in their head and in their body. But they also know, like their terms and conditions on the user agreement between them and jazz, like they read it before they clicked on it or whatever.
Yeah,
so
they read it, which we don't do.
So they understand that it's like the primary thing about this music is resourcefulness. Like everyone learns the basics, but how can you, in like a clever, personalized, resourceful way, bend things to your will? Because just saying you don't like the sound of the chords, or like it's too open or vertical, or it's too vanilla, it's like, well, that's more of a reflection on your inability to bend them to your will rather than the natural state they're found in.
Wow.
I don't like triangles. I personally don't use them. Okay, well, seems like a failure of imagination.
Right. Yeah. No, you're totally right. Yeah. Because you can have a really hard time in life if you just never use triangles.
I avoid triangles. Circles aren't my vibe. My cars roll on square tires.